Hello, everybody, and welcome to a podcast, a special podcast that I'm doing. I'm DigiBro, and I'm joined by my buddy, E-kon.
Hello there.
E-kon, you are perhaps best known to the internet as a guy who made a video shitting on me for 15 minutes. But it was from
15 minutes?
something like that.
Something like that.
From a place of love, though, I would say.
Oh yeah,
Maybe
definitely.
that wasn't apparent to everybody who watched it, but we're pals, we're buddies. We've hung out a number of times in person. Anyway, that's not relevant to this. I just thought how would you describe yourself so that people don't just know you as the guy who I perplexingly seem to hang out with, even though he made video shitting on me for 15 minutes.
Well, first of all, I think that there's this sort of misunderstanding here. You have to really care about somebody to shit on them that aggressively, right? Like you wouldn't, go out and berate a child if it wasn't your own child, You wouldn't be like, bad Billy, bad, or bad dog, or whatever to somebody else's, right?
But most of the people who make videos shitting on me for 15 minutes I don't like. So
That's fair.
But you surely have done other things on the internet or in general that people might, I don't know, want to know about. Didn't you make some really popular mod for something?
For Skyrim and Fallout and stuff like that, but that I wouldn't want people to know who I was in that case.
Okay.
I guess aside from that, I'm also probably one of the largest collectors of anime keyframes in the American Southeast. But
Okay.
aside from that, there's not much else to me. I don't have a very big internet presence, unlike you.
That's such a specific thing.
This podcast would probably double the size of whatever presence I have.
Yeah, one of the biggest animation cell collectors of the Southeast United States. I guess that's still a pretty good accolade. Is it accolade or accolade?
I don't know. I'm sure the British say it differently or some.
What I know you for best is that you love to argue, like more than anyone I've ever known. And I come from a line of arguers. My mom is a big arguer. I'm a big arguer. I'm used to being in arguments. Some people can't take arguments. Some people hear an argument going on and they're like, "Why are those guys so mad at each other?" But it's not always that. Some of us just have this in our blood. We have this natural instinct. And I think you have it more strongly than anyone I've ever known.
Don't be so humble, did you? You're a pretty argumentative.
I watch you argue every day. Every day I see you arguing.
Well, because you already have a goddamn outlet through like your videos and whatever.
True.
Some of us don't have that. And you're probably like you've nutted. You've exerted yourself. You are so eagerly arguing in your videos. You don't have the effort to argue with poor plebs like us anymore. And it's pronounced pleb, not plebe, you goddamn pleb.
I know that. The plebe and the weeb is a joke, if you were wondering. Anyways, because it rhymes, and that makes it funnier. So, I'll agree with that. I'm here to give you a platform. I'm here to give you a place to argue in front of an audience. And I'm very curious, because you're someone who you enjoy giving criticism a whole lot. You are always talking about how people should listen to criticism, and I think it'll be interesting to see how people might respond to your arguments in this video, and how you might respond to the criticism those people have of you as a result.
No, as much as I love giving criticism, I take it too. I enjoy being criticized as well. I think the important part about criticism, and arguing for that matter, is that it kind of puts your opinions through some sort of natural selection, where the weak die out and the strong survive, and what you're left with is like your previous beliefs in shambles and ripped apart and torn through, but the strongest bits survive, and those are the bits you can expand upon.
Yeah.
If you never argue and you never challenge yourself, and a lot of people, it makes people uncomfortable, right? Because their beliefs and what they like and what they dislike, it becomes part of their identity. So when you argue with them, they take it as a personal insult, because their beliefs are so important to them.
I think that's the biggest difference between people who love to argue and people who don't, is that we can separate that a little bit more.
Oh
like,
yeah, definitely.
Like, I don't take most of something that's hard for me to explain in videos is that I don't take my opinions that seriously, and that's why I'm open to argue about them, you know. But like, I don't know, it's hard to convince people that's true.
I think that's why people also call you a hypocrite sometimes, like me.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it's because I don't take my opinions seriously enough to hold on to them.
Your opinions change so often that, like, you know, when you present yourself as identity online, people are like, oh, Digi says one thing and then he says another, but, you know, people change.
Yeah. So anyways, that's all just preamble. Let's get into our actual fucking argument, which I'm gonna need you to explain exactly what we're arguing about tonight.
I was about to ask you that.
We've had this on the back burner for like 3 weeks to a month or something like that.
Yeah.
We were arguing about Hayao Miyazaki. I don't remember the tenor of the conversation was sort of that you believe that Miyazaki has grown stale and that he maybe is overrated or just doesn't deserve to be talked about as much.
I think this was like stemmed from when you were talking about Ponyo, and I think this goes back, like, if you want to really trace it back all the way to when we were at Anime Expo. I think we had a discussion about this. But I think at the beginning of an argument or a debate like this, it's very important to clarify exactly what we're talking about. So, you know, the conversation doesn't keep changing tracks and whatever.
Yeah.
And also, so all the notes I take don't go to waste. I believe, at least from my perspective, what I believe we were going to talk about was, you were saying Miyazaki, you know, is fantastic, is great. I think most people would agree with you. And I was saying I don't think he deserves the praise that he gets. And I think that idolizing him can be a very bad thing.
Okay.
So my criticisms are that, I think Miyazaki is overrated. And I think his works have a lot of unacknowledged flaws that people should look more closely at.
Okay. I'll be very curious. I'm looking forward to your notes because I feel very differently.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I came at this so hard that I wanted to do a podcast about it is that I'm sort of a new Miyazaki acolyte. Was not a fan for most of my anime fandom. You know, I've been watching anime for over 15 years. I'd only seen
Jesus Christ, nerd, get a life.
Yeah, I'd only seen like Spirited Away, and I never really understood it growing up. Like, I'd seen it several times over the years and wasn't that into it. Saw Princess Mononoke, but I was too young to even remember it till I rewatched it recently. The first one I saw that I actually kind of liked was Kiki's Delivery Service, and other than that, I hated Castle in the Sky. And it wasn't until a couple years ago when The Wind Rises came out, and I saw that, and like a combination of seeing that, Ponyo, rewatching some of the old ones, suddenly I was like a huge fan. And so now suddenly I'm like find myself like I want to defend Miyazaki more than anyone because like to me it hasn't gotten old to see what's great about his movies because I kind of only just discovered it. And so yeah, I like as soon as I've been in the mindset lately, like Miyazaki is legitimately the greatest anime director, and like
really,
if anything, it's a shame people haven't been paying more attention to him over the years in a weird way. I don't feel like anybody's been
wasn't his the only anime that's ever won an Oscar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spirited Away, the only.
So to say it's that he should be getting like 5 Oscars. He should have gotten an Oscar for Kiki. He should have gotten an Oscar for Totoro.
He certainly should have. I mean, he was fucking robbed. The Wind Rises lost to like Frozen, I think. Like what the fuck, you know?
I think Frozen was a better movie than The Wind Rises, but we can get to that later.
You're a fucking insane person.
We can get to that later.
All the commenters just turned on you.
Well, I think I have some pretty good points about The Wind Rises and such. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I'm not so contrarian that I'm gonna say that any of Miyazaki's movies are terrible or anything. You know, I'm not that contrarian. I might be a contrarian this way, but I'm not gonna be, you know, that sort of brash. Yeah. I mean, I think most of them are quite good. In fact, I think every single one of Miyazaki's movies, and even some of the old stuff he's worked on, World Masterpiece Theater, if you've seen that, Future Boy Conan, which I watched just recently.
Do you actually watch the whole show in preparation for this?
Yes.
Oh wow. I wish I had. I've only seen the first 4 episodes.
What's
it
called?
That
the fly. Ah, shit. What was the flying ship called? I don't know. I went through it like a night. The flying ship is so cool, though. Oh my god. But yeah, I think everything he's made. What was the name of that? I'm gonna have to look it up later. I think everything that Miyazaki's ever made is worth watching to some extent. I personally own a large collection of his storyboards, or at least secondhand copies of it. The originals are too expensive.
Have you read Nazca, by the way?
The manga?
Yeah.
Not all of it, but I've read part of it. I read like the first half.
Good
enough. Anyways, yeah. If you look at his storyboards, they're intensely detailed, and the little notes he makes, and he essentially key animates every frame of the movie by himself in his storyboards.
Well, I think that's a huge part of the way he sort of sees anime is that, like, because I've been reading Starting Point, his book. Well, the book that just collects a bunch of like interviews, quotes, and stuff like that. And the first part, the very beginning of the book, he talks. It's like this is a quote from him from like 1979. Like all he directed at the time was Future Boy Conan and Lupin the Third: The Castle of Cagliostro. Obviously, he'd been working in the industry for like almost 20 years at this point, but like he's talking about the decline of anime because there's too many shows being made in 1979, and how like everyone's short-staffed and all this stuff. But like his ultimate complaint was basically that it used to be animators made a thing entirely by themselves, and like that he kind of misses when animation was just like an animator has an idea and they want to bring it to life, as opposed to like a committee comes together to like produce a product for television. And I think that's why he does so much on his movies, is that like in his mind it's really just him making the movie. Other people are just kind of like facilitating his ability to make a feature-length film or something. That's how it feels, I think he still kind of sees himself as like making whatever he wants entirely by himself, and it just so happens that what he wants to make is incredibly marketable.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I completely agree with that sentiment. And I wanted to get into that in a bit, but you're right though. Like everything he's made a lot of money. It has been fantastically. I can't remember the last time like a Ghibli movie directed by Miyazaki that got like a negative critical response. Well, I guess there was like Earthsea, but that was his son, the other Miyazaki.
Ponyo had some backlash, I would say.
Oh, come on. It's still like 80 to 90 on Metacritic or something like that.
Sure. It's still positive reviews, but I bet if you saw what the actual aggregate score was, it would probably be lower than most of his movies.
I'm sure.
Because it got a lot of flack for being too childish from people. But people who wanted him to make another Princess Mononoke,
But anyways, everything I've said, though, about Miyazaki, I think I could say about Mamoru Oshii. That everything he's made is worth watching. That everything he's made is at least pretty good. And, but people don't spank their meat to how amazing Mamoru Oshii is. Or how
Mamoru Oshii has books written about him. Like,
so does Miyazaki, but vastly more.
I know, but
and you
can't
deny Mamoru Oshii. He gets far less attention than Miyazaki. Miyazaki is considered this, amazing legend in the industry, and Oshii's just a really good director. What about Kon?
Simultaneously agree and disagree, because I think that Oshii has been... I think he's like probably the second most beloved anime director. Just it happens that the distance between first and second is very vast.
Exactly, that's my point.
I don't think that's to knock Miyazaki at all, though. I think that's to knock the way that media appreciates anime. That Miyazaki is the only director who fucking especially in the West, who anyone knows the name of.
I mean, this is not an endemic to the West, though. In Japan, it's also the same thing. You ask anybody what anime director they know, it's Miyazaki.
Miyazaki.
Miyazaki is arguably even more beloved in Japan, where Ghibli
Sure.
has way more money and gets the best talent, and their movies are just head and shoulders above the production quality of anything else that's
Right.
being made, film or TV anime wise.
I think.
And so you think to
I think.
yourself, if somebody like Oshii or Khan or Otomo with Akira, if they were given the same tools and resources as Miyazaki was, they could make, in my opinion, far superior movies.
Do you think that Otomo didn't have that level of like? I mean, Akira is one of the most beautiful films ever made. Like, I don't think it's like far below the level of a Ghibli film. It's certainly not of the era. It's definitely it's better looking than My Neighbor Totoro. Came out like the same time. I would say Akira has more visual.
Akira has a lot of visual flair. But if you actually look at the animation itself compared to projects that Ghibli were doing at the time, like Porco Rosso and...
Porco Rosso's from the 90s. We're talking about 88, 89. Akira came out alongside
what I'm talking
Totoro
about, like,
and Grave of the Fireflies.
Early Grave of the Fireflies, Totoro. When you're looking at stuff like that, like, I think Ghibli's animation-wise, they had people like, what's it called? Yonebashi and stuff on the team. At least in the kind of talents they were able to accrue, Miyazaki's reputation certainly got him a lot further.
I would agree with the argument that maybe there's a couple of animators who were working on Totoro who were better than any of the animators working on Akira. I could agree with that. I don't think that was necessarily a result of like lesser budget or anything like that. I don't think it was a result of like having less at their disposal so much as just like, I don't know, like maybe one or two animators who were just a little bit more technically skilled than the people working on Akira. But like Akira has insane amounts of like gorgeous animation.
That's fair. And Steam Boy was like the most expensive anime
Steam
film
Boy
ever
is
made.
fucking insane.
And that was Otomo too. So
Steam Boy is a constant
maybe that's an
Sakuga.
unfair comparison. But at the same time, I think, just because we idolize Miyazaki as so head and shoulders above everybody, as some golden god,
I think here's the funny thing though, and here's why I simultaneously agree and disagree with you. I do think Miyazaki's overpraised by normies. Like, I think normal people know who he is. Everyday people know who he is, and including in Japan. Like in Japan, everybody knows who Miyazaki is. But they don't know who Oshii is, and that's because they're not anime fans. But, like, anybody who cares about the medium would know who all these other directors are. And I think, in many ways, anime fandom and perhaps anime creators have undervalued Miyazaki because they see him as something else. And I know that's how I felt coming up in anime. Like, as a fan, I always saw Ghibli as, like, not anime, almost. Like, oh, that's just another world. Like, they're so much higher quality and they're aimed at, a broader audience. But when I actually watch Ghibli films, I don't think they're really aimed at a broader audience. They just happen to reach a broader audience. But, like, Miyazaki is certainly an auteur filmmaker. Like, he's not doing shit because it's what will sell. It just happens to sell because he has that reputation.
That's true. But let me ask you this. What do you think defines a great filmmaker?
Oh, there's no easy answer to that for me. Do you have one?
I mean, I was just asking your opinion. Just give me what comes off the top of your head. What do you think are important qualities, or what do you think makes somebody deserving of that?
Oh, that's a hard question. What I think makes a great filmmaker? I mean, I would say a combination of like technical ability, like understanding of your craft. Okay, I would say a great filmmaker is somebody who has like a vision for what they want to make and is capable of executing that vision to the best of their abilities.
Okay. Is Michael Bay a fantastic filmmaker?
I would say What
I'm talking about is not just a good filmmaker, but like a truly legendary filmmaker.
Yeah,
like we talk about.
I would say Michael Bay isn't, and I'd say that's because of the fact that the techniques he uses are not necessarily the ones that will get the best result at the genre he's trying to. Like he makes action movies, but I think that his frenetic style, while it creates that Bayhem effect, but I don't think it like actually conveys interesting action and engaging action scenes. You know, I feel like
so then there's another quality to that definition. So it has to be somebody with the skill and the vision to do something they want, but that they also have to understand what they're doing, and they have to use appropriate things for that style or that tone. Like you can't make Pearl Harbor and turn like, you know, a war story into a romance, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what Miyazaki did with Wind Rises.
I don't think the Wind Rises is a romance at all. In fact, I think it's almost weirdly aromantic and like clinical in a way that's actually kind of off-putting to me. Because the way it portrays everything really is like just facts of this guy's life. The Wind Rises is like a super autistic movie to me.
Well, I mean, he did cast Hideaki Anno.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was on purpose.
Let me get that in a bit. I have something I wanted to say about that. Okay. But yeah, as I was saying, to me, at least, what I define as a great filmmaker is somebody who has the skills and the technical know-how and, you know, the appropriate understanding of what he's working with. But I think that just makes a good filmmaker. I think what makes somebody truly legendary is somebody who elevates the medium, who makes outstanding and long-lasting changes, stuff like, you know, Orson Welles, you know, or Steven Spielberg, somebody who changes the film, whatever medium he's working in, and constantly challenges himself. And these last two traits are what I don't see in Miyazaki.
You don't think that he changed the medium?
I don't think that his impact on the medium is the same as somebody like Tomino, somebody like Dezaki, somebody like even Oshii.
I think you're looking... Okay, here's why I think that... This is what I really wanted to argue with you about, is this thing here. First of all, I think the reason that Miyazaki didn't have the impact that you might expect is that nobody kind of had the balls to copy him, or could copy him. I think
no. I think a lot of people have tried to copy Miyazaki,
and failed miserably.
And I think that's because of the fact that they copy Miyazaki with thinking that he is this, you know, golden god, this paragon, you know, the apex of animation, if you will. And they don't realize many of the very real issues that Miyazaki as a director, and especially as a writer, has. And so when they brainlessly just copy what Miyazaki did, thinking, oh, I'm just going to be the next Miyazaki, you end up with Hoshino o Kodomo, you know?
Yeah.
I know you hated that movie, right?
Yeah, it's fucking terrible.
Terrible.
I think when I look at... Because this is what I've been feeling as I watch Miyazaki films lately. Because I've been watching I have seen assloads of anime, and I've been watching tons of movies. And as I watch Ghibli films next to basically anything else, all I can think is, like, nobody fucking has touched this guy yet. Like, dude's made stuff that I don't think any other director, any other anime studio has, like, put out something that's been as perfect as a Miyazaki film. And so to me, I see it like, yeah, maybe he hasn't evolved as much as I would like, but who's pushing him to? You know, like, where's his competition?
I think he has a lot of competition, really.
Who do you think is a competitor for Hayao Miyazaki?
Well, let me first get into where I think Miyazaki's failings are.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, I want to talk about Miyazaki as a writer instead of as a director.
Okay.
Which I think is, in a large part, where most of his failings comes from.
Because the man has been known to not actually write any script until they are in the animation stage of production.
Yeah, but there's this weird tradition in Japan that directors are expected to also be the screenwriters for whatever they're working on. And, you know, that's all especially true with Miyazaki. He's been the writer on basically every film he's worked on. Some of them have been adaptations, but, you know, he's a very prolific writer when it comes to his own movies.
Yeah.
And first and foremost, I think that's a terrible habit the industry needs to break out of.
I don't think there's that much of it anymore. I think that's more
I think there's still plenty. You look like somebody like Mamoru Hosoda, who's a fantastic director. When it comes to putting together like dense emotive scenes, he's very, very good. When you unleash him, when you unchain the man, and you just let him write, and write whatever he wants. Because his first movie is Tokikake, the girl who left through time. I guess people want to know about that name.
Well, his first movie is a Digimon movie, but
first original movie. And Summer Wars, they were all written by somebody else. They were all written by I think her name was Psycho something. I can't remember.
I don't know.
But they had another writer, and you look at that, and you look at the difference between like Boy and the Beast, and it shows. You let the guy go unhinged and unleashed, and he just makes a furry fetish movie because he really wants to.
So he wrote that himself. I didn't even.
He wrote that himself. Yes, of course he wrote that himself.
I still haven't seen The Boy and the Beast yet.
I think kind of the same issue applies to Miyazaki, where everybody respects him too much. And he's been at the helm for so long that he's developed these endemic issues to him and his writing style.
So what are they? What are these issues?
Well,
before I decide if I agree with you or not.
When it comes to his writing, I think the man cannot write character arcs. I think the man is very, very bad at writing character arcs.
Give me
characters.
Examples.
His characters tend to start very flat and unemotive. A lot of
Give
the
me
times
examples.
Okay,
give me examples.
Give you examples. For example, whenever he's working on a wholly original story, he falls back into very similar templates. There's always a child protagonist. I mean, we could talk about every single Ghibli movie there.
Yes.
Some bad guy who's, Well,
right,
actually,
give me an example of a bad character arc.
A bad character arc. All right. Let's talk about The Wind Rises there. All right.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about The Wind Rises there. I think The Wind Rises was Miyazaki's attempt to break apart from the mode of what he usually does, which is, the man usually does, well, for the first part of half of his career, he was making copies of Future Boy Conan, and then after Princess Mononoke, he was making copies of like Spirited Away. But when it comes to Wind Rises, that was the most original movie he's put together in a long, long time. And when I went into it, and what it was advertised as, I was expecting this careful, character drama about the pursuit of beauty and the challenges that artists face to get them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what the movie was going for, but it got lost in itself. And it just ends up being, the first half of the movie being about a guy masturbating over airplanes, and the second half of the movie is a mediocre love story. And I think that's, you can't deny.
I think you came into that movie with expectations that were different from the ones I came into, and I don't remember feeling that way.
Well, in that case, I mean, I just feel like the movie doesn't tell a very cohesive story, right? Because how does the sentimental love story tie in with the first part of the movie? Which
for what it's worth, it's meant to be a biopic. It's not a movie that's
telling. But it's not a biopic. It's not actually a biopic. It's completely fictional.
It's a story of a real guy's life.
It's a fictionalized story about the real guy's life.
Sure, but it's a fictional biopic.
The real guy lived to be 80. His wife did not die, and he was like a perfectly happy dude.
My point, though, in calling it a biopic is that it is paced like a biopic. It's paced like just showing you this man's life from point A to point B of when he got the idea that he was going to make planes up until when he stopped making planes. And it's sort of the story of how does he make it from that point to that point. That's what the arc is. It's in many ways, it's not an arc that happens in small, like, it's not a gradual arc. It's really more of an arc that takes him all the way to an apex of making planes and then cuts it off right there when he realizes that these planes have been used for, killing everybody.
See, that's the thing I hear about the movie, and that's, again, how I went into watching the movie. But then you watch the movie and you realize it doesn't actually really address these topics at all. The guy kind of hears another person say, "Oh, hey, these planes are going to be used in the Pacific War."
Oh yeah, no,
and these planes are going to be.
Think that's...
There were like 2 lines of dialogue referencing that fact, and then the guy just decides, "Hey, my wife is dying of consumption. Let's go with her." To me, that's a very, very bad way of putting it.
This is why I called it an autistic film. And I think it's because what I see in this character is that the point kind of is that he closes out all of that. That he doesn't care about all the other shit that's happening that's surrounding him. He just cares about making planes. And at one point cares about this woman, you know? But, like, the kind of person he is, it's the single-minded devotion to a thing that he's passionate about, that he can't see past. And at no point does he even question it until it's so blindingly obvious that this was a bad idea that he can't do it anymore, you know? And I think that's why, for instance, that Hideaki Anno voices him. It's like, he's meant to be representative of the creator. And I always took this movie as Miyazaki writing about himself. Like, that was how I felt the first time I saw it. Although I think it's hilarious that he continually writes in that you're only you only truly have artistic talent for 10 years. And it's funny that this is your argument, essentially, is that he's not evolving anymore, because I would say that he agrees. I would say he accuses himself of that in The Wind Rises, saying there's only 10 years you can actually be good.
Somebody criticizes Miyazaki, even if it is Miyazaki.
Sure.
But if that's the point that you're making, I don't think that should be told on sort of a meta-narrative level. If the point of the movie was, let's make this movie abruptly jarring, and that's the point of the movie, and that can only be understood on meta level, then to me that's an inelegant movie. You know, compare this to...
You could call it inelegant, but it worked really well for me.
Compare this to Porco Rosso. Did you watch that?
I still haven't seen Porco Rosso. It's the only one I haven't seen yet.
Do you mind if I spoil it?
Go ahead, I guess.
Okay. My apologies if this ruins your viewing experience. I know you're not somebody who cares about spoilers much, though.
Not particularly.
In Porco Rosso, there's a very, very similar conflict. It's about this guy in the pursuit of an art, which is, you know, flying his plane, and the issues he has to deal with. He hurts the people he cares about. There's this woman that's in love with him that he ignores because of his, you know, thing for flying. Mm-hmm. There's the fact that these planes are used for war, and they're symbols of violence, and people get killed. He's like a bounty hunter, and, you know, a big part of the movie is just him trying to deal with that, and deal with the fact that, these planes are terrible machines of war, but they're also so beautiful. It's a very similar sentiment to, well, at least what was intended for Wind Rises, I think.
Okay.
But the movie tells it in a very elegant way. It uses
So Miyazaki already made that movie, so why make the elegant one again?
I mean, you could say that, but that's not an excuse for, you know, just the
you could say
poorly
but what is
movie.
An excuse? This is the way I see it. I don't think any director has to make all their movies good, or even necessarily escalatingly better. What I do think they need to do is stay ahead of the curve.
I agree.
I think Miyazaki has always been ahead of the curve, and I think that the reason his career starts to look stale is that no one's made him change. No one's forced him to evolve. There hasn't been a big enough evolution in anime in the time that he's been involved with it that he would have to change massively and, like, really think about, you know, what he's doing. Like, I don't think he's ever... I can't imagine Miyazaki looking at anything that any young animators are doing today and going like, wow, that's really impressive and that's the future. And maybe part of that is because he's a curmudgeon-y old man. Maybe he's just not that visionary. Maybe he's stuck in his ways. But, like, I can't imagine him looking at anything happening right now and being, like, impressed with it compared to his own
work. When you're talking about ahead of the curve, and then you're saying Miyazaki's not embracing these new things, part of being ahead of the curve is being experimental and adapting new techniques.
Sure.
And
I mean,
Miyazaki,
I will say
Miyazaki as a writer and as an animator for the past 30 or so years, you know, has been tremendously consistent in both a very good and a very bad way. Like I was saying earlier, for the first part of his career, basically every single movie he made was some variant of Future Boy Conan.
I totally disagree with that, but
it's a usually.
In what way is My Neighbor Totoro similar to Future Boy Conan?
I said basically everyone. Basically,
so what?
Nausicaa.
So basically means like Lupin, 4 out of 5 or something.
Lupin, yeah, basically 4 out of 5.
I think
Lupin, Caso Cagliostro, Laputa.
How is Lupin like Future Boy Conan? It's just a Lupin the Third movie.
It's a little different from a usual Lupin the Third movie. But...
It's not that different. Okay, I've watched a bunch of them. It's not that different. It's
Secret
basically
of,
a Lupin movie, and Nazca. The manga is like an
I'm not
epic
talking about
war
the manga.
story.
I know
I'm just
the
saying
manga.
that the anime is basically just a truncated version, though.
Not quite. I'm just talking about characters and story structure here. For the first part of his career,
I definitely see stuff like Nazca as having been heavily influenced by the World Masterpiece Theater stuff. Or not even just that, but also the early Isao Takahata films. Like, I see Nazca more as being like Horus, Prince of the Sun, than like Future Boy Conan, which of course Miyazaki worked on.
I think they're all fairly similar in a way or another, and I think a big part of that is influenced by this stuff they did on Future Boy Conan and World Masterpiece Theater, because there was this thing for these adventure stories. I think as of My Neighbor Totoro is when Miyazaki came into his own and was I think that was a fluke at the time, but like in anticipation for a type of filmmaking he would take up in the future, because Totoro, that was pretty early in his career.
Not really. Totoro came out at the end of the 80s. Like, that's pretty fucking deep. Dude's been working in anime since the 60s.
That's true. But either way, when I'm talking about Conan, what I'm saying is there's usually two protagonists, a young man and a young woman, and they discover like an ancient secret of some sort, and the villain's connected to it somehow and wants to use it for evil. And this ancient secret is generally something that goes against nature and the natural way things are. And then the villain, in his hubris, he dies or runs off, and the story ends with a moral about how great nature is and how you need to live in harmony with it. And if you think about it, that pretty much describes the stories of Conan, that describes the story of Casa of Cagliostro, that describes the story of Laputa, and Nausicaa. So it's like,
sure,
that's essentially the kind of plot arc he was working with.
That's what he was doing. His career. That's not the first half, though. That's like the first 5 years of his career. You're not accounting for that. In the late 80s, he does Totoro. Next after that, he does, I think, Kiki's Delivery Service, Porco Rosso. Then he eventually does Princess Mononoke, which is more like those previous ones. Like, he's sort of getting back to his roots in a way.
I think
then he does Spirited Away, goes in a totally different direction. And then Howl's Moving Castle is often accused of being just Spirited Away, like, again. I don't think Ponyo is at all similar to Spirited Away, and certainly not the Wind Rises.
I think Ponyo is very similar to Spirited Away. I think, actually, Mononoke was like a shifting point, where this new kind of style of Miyazaki filmmaking that you
maybe even a turning point, since that's the name of the book that starts after that point. Literally, that's what it is. It's from Mononoke onwards is turning point, whereas the first book is starting point.
I think Mononoke was for Miyazaki a very innovative movie. And I think it's a nice way of kind of bridging between these two eras of Miyazaki filmmaking. In Mononoke, we see a villain who isn't just outright evil, and is even sympathetic, and that becomes a theme that he has in most of his later movies. You see him experiment with digital animation, which in a way was kind of a brief love affair. And you see a more sort of nuanced approach to storytelling.
I think from that movie onwards, I think all of his movies have more digital stuff than people give them credit for.
Oh yeah, sure. But like
people make it out like he's like anti-CG or something.
No, past that point, digital color and composition was the norm with everybody, more or less. But past that point, I think his movies shift into kind of another sort of formula. Usually you have like a young child who's put face to face with supernatural forces, and they romp around and learn about themselves. And rather than being an adventure story, it's more about an inward journey about growing up. And the love interest is usually bland as all hell.
I don't think Ponyo's like that at all, though.
What? Ponyo's exactly like that. And the stakes are low, and the antagonist is always redeemed at the end.
No one in Ponyo has to learn about themselves. There is no character arcs in Ponyo. Ponyo is just Ponyo
herself, her character arc is literally the defining part of the movie. At the end, when her dad asks her, "Hey, do you want to be a fish or a human?" Like, that basically is summing up the idea of the movie.
But she would have wanted to be a human from like literally the first 20 seconds.
Which is why it's a bad character arc.
It doesn't need a character arc. Ponyo is not a movie that requires character arcs.
Doesn't need a character arc. a story about characters doesn't necessitate that the characters grow or change in some
No,
way.
I don't think that's even remotely necessary for a movie.
I think that's a very necessary part of a movie.
I
I think
don't-
that without this sort of empathetic character and without,
You can have an
inward-
empathetic character who doesn't change. Characters don't have to change to be interesting or
They
empathetic.
don't necessarily have to change to be interesting. I agree, but when you're talking about like any sort of storytelling like this, and the characters are going on a journey and they're having an adventure, there has to be some sort of inward change.
I don't think so.
And I think the lack of that is the reason why I personally was not that invested in the movie, because it just kind of felt like it went nowhere. The characters didn't develop as people.
Ponyo-
They didn't change all that much.
Ponyo doesn't go anywhere, but that's what I like about it. See, I feel what I like about Ponyo is that it is just a movie of just love. Like, that's all it's about. It's just about these two kids. It's just pure love with no questions asked. There's no like conflict. Then
it's just so meaningless. If there's
life is meaningless, E-kon.
Oh, shut up! Is Miyazaki a nihilist now?
No, he believes in love, and I believe
when you
love
don't have-
gives meaning to life.
Love is not just a word you can tack onto something, and it's
No,
not
but
just
I
an
think
abstract
it's-
concept you can stick
I
onto
think
characters
it's
and be
pretty
like,
clear.
they're in love, and this is perfect love.
I
No.
think that's the point.
Love is the way characters get to know each other, the way they affect change on one another. The way
Ponyo and
their feelings
Sosuke-
drive them.
Ponyo and Sosuke have what I would consider to be what makes their love so entertaining to me is the fact that neither of them really, like, both of them are just so incredibly interested in what the other has to offer. There's never a moment where they're like, oh, that's questionable, or like, oh, I don't know about this, or like a conflict in the relationship. What they just happen to like everything about each other, and so their relationship just goes off without a hitch. There's no need for conflict because they just love each other. There's nothing more to it.
I think there is sort of a need for conflict there, and I think the lack of which is kind of what makes
it might bother a lot of people. Movie. It doesn't bother me. That's not the way
I'm sure.
I like living in a conflictless world.
I'm sure Miyazaki does too. But what I'm saying is that fact makes the movie thoroughly less interesting. It dehumanizes the characters. Well, to me,
it doesn't dehumanize them. To me, I think it makes them more relatable to me.
Can you remember any feature of Sosuke?
I could tell you literally every frame of that movie, dude. I've seen it a lot of times.
Tell me about his personality. What are his quirks?
Which one? Sosuke or Ponyo?
Sosuke. What is he like?
Sosuke
What are his hobbies?
He's very diligent. He loves his mom a whole lot, and he loves both of his parents a whole lot. Has a lot of respect for his dad, who's a Navy officer, who even though his dad's not really around all the time, he is okay with that because he thinks what his dad's doing is cool and important, He generally is easily excitable.
You're just describing any 6-year-old though.
He's a fucking 6-year-old. I mean,
I'm sure. But what is?
Yes,
it that
I
makes him
may
an
be
interesting
describing.
character?
What makes him an
sets him
interesting...
apart? What makes him memorable? What makes it so that the audience can relate to him?
What I relate to about mostly just that he's such a good kid. Like, he's very good-natured, and he
I'm sure Troy McClure would be able to relate with him a whole lot.
I want you to take into account that this kid wakes up and he sees the whole world flooded, and he's like, "Fuck, where's my mom? Let's go sail a boat out into this world." When I was a kid, I was afraid to leave my house. This kid inflates a boat and sails it out into this flooded world, and he's not even scared. Like, the whole time, him and Ponyo were just like, this is fucking cool. Look at all these ancient fish that we, for some reason, know the names of. Like, it's fucking dope, man.
I mean, I'll agree with you there. I thought that part was pretty cool. Like, he was just like, yeah, screw it. Who needs to, reflect on it, and just goes off. And I think the movie could have used more moments like this. But for example, at the end of the movie, where Ponyo's dad asks her, "Hey, you want to be a fish or a human?" It feels like a lot of the weight of that question is taken out because throughout the movie we haven't ever seen this.
I agree. I think there's one huge flaw.
What should have been the central conflict of the movie, was essentially ignored.
I feel
you see
I feel the inverse of what you feel, E-kon. I feel the inverse of that. And I mentioned this in my Ponyo video, that my biggest problem with the movie is that they even tried to put a conflict in it. Because the very end, I agree, the ending is the worst part of the film, and it's when they try to really play up this idea that, like, Ponyo has to make this huge decision, and that the fate of the world's riding on it, and, like, it really comes off as, like, kind of out of place in this movie that up until this point has never really conveyed that Ponyo has to grow as a character or make decisions, you know? So, like, to suddenly have that come up at the very end is weird, and I could see why you would think, oh, the whole movie should have been changed to fit that, because it sounds like that would be the case, like if you're writing a normal movie. But I think that that's the part I would just take out. Like, I would have just had it been a conflict-free thing all the way through, and that there was no character-defining decision at the end.
There's no such thing as a conflict-free movie, though. There's no such thing as a story that has no conflict. Stories need conflict to operate. It's just that the conflict comes in different ways.
What is this? How would you describe the story of Yokohama Shopping Log?
Yokohama Shopping Mall?
What is Shopping Log? What's the conflict?
Oh, Shopping Log. What's the conflict?
Kaidashi Kiko. Yeah, what's the
conflict? For
conflict?
Example, the conflict doesn't always have to be some sort of, like, battle between people or some deep inner, dilemma. The conflicts in Yokohama Shopping Mall are not too dissimilar to conflicts in slice-of-life things like Seinfeld. For example, that story where Alpha gets the camera. Her conflict is, hey, what do I do with it? What should I do with it? Sometimes
what about the episodes where it's just like her, like, sitting in a chair, like, watching the world? Like, what's the conflict?
She's usually reflecting on something.
Like, what? We don't usually get told that. There's a lot of shots in that show that are just like nature photography.
Well, nature photography doesn't constitute a story, though. Those are things that augment it. They're calm, soothing shots that enhance the story.
Why?
They are the bulk of the story itself.
I think there's a...
If Yokohama Shopping Log ends up being nothing but nature shots, it ceases to be Yokohama Shopping Log. It ends up being a very colorful sketchbook. Same thing with Ponyo. It's a very, very pretty and entertaining to watch, or maybe not entertaining, but aesthetically pleasing movie. It's very pretty. I like visually what it goes for.
I've made this. I'm known for this argument, but I think aesthetic is narrative in itself.
I agree, but I think
that the narrative component of Ponyo has less to do with the character arcs in their stories and more to do with, like, just what feelings that movie instills in the viewer is more of what is.
But then it's just a very expensive tech demo.
That's fine. Demo.
That's fine.
If it's a tech demo that hits you at the core of your soul, then that's completely fine as a great movie.
If you want to appreciate the movie as, a extended painting, or some sort of animated watercolor, that's fine. But I think if you're looking at it in such a way that, you're looking at it as a story, as a, plot about characters and events that happen.
Do you think that a great film has to tell a great story?
Not necessarily, but I don't think you can be half-assed about it. I think you either go all the way or you go none of the way. You either create something extremely expressionist and experimental, or you create something that actually has a story to tell.
I think that's a little extreme.
I think Ponyo kind of walks the line between the two.
I'll admit, in some ways I wish Ponyo concerned itself less with having a story, just a little bit. I don't think it needed to be, like, totally art house, but I do wish that it concerned itself less with having a story, so that people wouldn't get the wrong idea about it. Like,
even then though, I think I don't necessarily think having a story goes to the detriment of your whole aesthetics as narrative thing, though.
No.
In fact, the best movies are ones where they're used in unison, and a strong aesthetic narrative is used to reinforce themes and ideas and the plot itself.
That can be true.
Look at Spirited Away, for example. I honestly thought that movie was, I still think it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
And you look at the way the character develops, and you realize that the aesthetics of the movie reinforce that fact.
Sure.
Chihiro starts the movie as this kind of whiny brat, and then through hard labor at the bathhouse, she becomes more responsible, more adult, and when she goes back to her parents, at the very end of the movie, she does so a changed person, and that's what we can relate to. That's what makes it empathetic. That's what makes it a story where, like, oh man, something bad happened to Chihiro or Sen or whatever. That makes us feel bad.
But I relate to the characters in Ponyo.
I
relate to...
I think you might be the minority in that.
I am the minority. I know that. I'm just saying that for me, it is a perfect film. Like, and I think
Sorry,
almost everything, almost any piece of media can be perfect for someone, even if it's just that person has such a low media literacy that they just can appreciate a lot of bad things, But, like, I do think Ponyo's a movie that I kind of apologize for. It's not a movie that I consider to be like, oh, everyone's going to see why this movie is amazing. It's much more personal, than other Miyazaki films like Spirited Away, which, like, yeah, anyone can tell that that's a masterpiece,
Okay, I didn't hear, like, what you said for the past, like, however long.
Oh, goddamn.
Your audio bugged out, yeah.
Well, it wasn't important. All I was really saying was that I appreciate why Ponyo is more of a niche thing that appeals to me personally.
Oh, sure.
As opposed to Spirited Away, which I think is...
I think you should understand why people might have complaints about that movie, too.
Certainly. It's not hard to understand why people would complain about Ponyo. That's of the anime I consider favorites, there are few that I don't think most people would not like agree are masterpieces.
Oh yeah, sure. I still don't understand why you like Psycho-Pass, but
I've made like 100 videos about it. So if you really want to
watch none of them,
if you really want to go down that rabbit hole,
but yeah, Spirited Away, as I was saying, there's this whole story arc, there about this character that develops, and that makes her empathetic. Ultimately, when we watch a movie, we want more than the visuals. We want more than the atmosphere. We want
depending on who you are.
Depending on who you are, but for the general audience and for human beings in general. And what film directors should...
Are we trying to make the argument of whether or not Miyazaki should be like widely heralded as the greatest anime director? Because, like, if the argument you're trying to make is there are other directors who are more deserving of the level of like mainstream acclaim he has, then I could get your argument better.
No. My argument from the beginning was always that Miyazaki has flaws. He should not be treated as
everyone has
the pinnacle of animation. And as I mentioned, these flaws are things like character arcs. I believe his lack of innovation, and ultimately, I do not think he is somebody that should be imitated. And I'll get to that in a bit. But
I will agree. I agree that he shouldn't be imitated, but I mean that on its face kind of way. Like, I think the problem with, for instance, The Children Who Chase Lost Voices is that it's not imitating Miyazaki's ethos. It's just imitating the very bare bones elements of his aesthetic.
I don't think Miyazaki's ethos should be imitated either.
That's where I disagree. I think there needs to be more people who are willing to go totally insane on making what they consider a perfect product.
I agree, and I don't think Miyazaki does that enough. I think Miyazaki's approach to creating anime is kind of like the approach that Jiro Ono has towards making sushi. He believes that by holding his craft, by sealing himself in a room and just chopping the little fish into bits, he can make perfect anime. Right. And I don't think that's a proper way to go about it. I
agree.
But when you're talking about any sort of art like this, it's not a work of, you're not trying to draw a perfect circle. You're trying to make something that people will relate with, that will affect people, and that will be aesthetically pleasing.
Here's what I think.
And you can't do that without the input of others, and you can't do that without constantly trying new things and changing yourself.
Here's what I think
compare Miyazaki.
Here's what I think would make me come around to your side.
Okay.
If there was a director who I thought was consistently making better films than Miyazaki, then I think it would be easier for me to say, like, this dude's doing things wrong.
I think there is.
Who is?
Takahata.
What? Isao Takahata. I don't like his movies.
I mean, that's fine, but a lot of his movies are very period and people specific. They don't tend to have the same kind of international appeal that Miyazaki's movies do. However, I do believe they're solidly better movies. Takahata goes out of his way to try new things, He never sticks himself to a genre. He constantly switches between different sources to adapt and different kinds of stories to tell and different demographics and genres. One minute he'll be making Grave of the Fireflies, and the other minute he'll be making a movie about raccoon balls.
Yeah. I'll agree that he's more innovative than Miyazaki.
When you come to his work, you see that this is a man who's never satisfied. When you watch something like Omoi de Poro Poro, you see so much experimental stuff that he's doing. Lightening the corners of the frame, such for that nostalgic feeling, or creating a scene that's 5 minutes focused on eating pineapple. I mean, can you imagine Miyazaki doing something like that? Yeah, I agree. But it's that kind of subtle characterization that I think that Miyazaki tends to lack when he's doing something. He doesn't kind of put in this effort to make people empathetic with his characters, to get people really into the heads of the characters. He's much more concerned about moving the story along, the fantasy, and the atmosphere of it all. Not to say that he hasn't. I think the character arc in stuff like Spirited Away and Porco Rosso was terribly interesting. The way Porco Rosso starts at the beginning, and because, you know, it almost feels like some sort of Hemingway-esque metaphor for the lost generation of World War One, where Porco Rosso's kind of disillusioned. He's like, I don't need to participate in human things. I'm a pig now. I'm above all that. Pigs are clean animals. And then at the end, you know, kind of very, very, very blatantly, he says, hey, I feel good about humanity now. And then there's a scene at the end of the movie that, you know, spoilers, he turns into a human. But I don't think Miyazaki's above that. I think he's done that before. But unlike Takahata, who's constantly experimenting and trying new things, everything from Kaguya to a war story about kids dying in war, and then like adaptations of comic strips and, you know, stuff like that. There is a man that even Miyazaki looks up to, who is never satisfied with himself, who has access to the same talent, and
do you think that he's made as good of movies as Miyazaki, though?
Yes, I do. However, and this is what I wanted to get to, I think he doesn't, unlike Miyazaki, he doesn't shelter himself, and he takes great efforts to understand his audience. That's why when you look at his movies, they're so obviously directed towards a Japanese demographic. You expect anybody in the West is going to understand why Omoi de Poro Poro is a powerful movie when they don't understand the culture that goes around it?
I think Omoi de Poro Poro is the easiest of his movies for a Western audience to understand. I don't expect a Western audience to understand fucking Pom Poko or Kaguya-hime.
Kaguya or My Neighbor the Whatevers, or Grave of the Fireflies. I think that's part of the reason why his work is undervalued. It's because there's not that cultural background. And he's designing these movies specifically.
But Miyazaki, as you have said, is more beloved than Takahata even in Japan. It's not as though Takahata's making the Japanese think he's literally God, but the Americans don't know jack shit.
That's true. I'm not going to deny that. What I'm saying is that when he makes a movie, he makes it with people in mind. He is not so he is an auteur, sure, but he's not so auteur as to ignore what message he wants to tell and what kinds of stories he wants to show to people. He makes things clearly with this kind of message or emotional resonance in mind, while Miyazaki seems more interested in pursuing things for the sake of aesthetics. And
how many of Miyazaki's films would you consider to be masterpieces?
That's difficult to say. I would say 3.
Which ones?
I would say Spirited Away.
Okay.
Porco Rosso.
Mm-hmm.
And Laputa.
I would consider My Neighbor Totoro and Ponyo, but that's me. Yeah, and The Wind Rises. And Princess Mononoke.
I've pointed out my complaints about Wind Rises already, but again, it comes down to, I think that...
How many of Isao Takahata's films do you think are masterpieces?
Most of them. I think Wind Rises is where a more Isao Takahata touch would have helped, because I don't think the character was written that well. I think we understood that he had this single-minded fascination with planes and then his wife, sure, but clearly he was trying to go for something else. When you look at that last scene in that movie, and you see the character, and he's going up and talking to this guy, and he's like, in the end, was it all worth it? And the guy is like, hey, we gotta do what we gotta do. I feel like that's a major theme of the movie that, it wasn't touched upon.
I felt like it was. I felt like I understood
in 2 lines of, dialogue, If it was obvious to you, I don't think and it was kind of I know what the movie was trying to say, just didn't feel like it expressed it that well. For example, at the beginning of the movie, you remember that earthquake scene, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the best scenes that Miyazaki's ever done. I love that scene.
It's a great scene.
And I wish that, for example, if, like, at the end of Act 2, when the character's, like, questioning his, talking, you know, learns about the nature of his planes, maybe there's an imagined scene or some actual scene where you see, like, you know, his planes going out and bombing a city and devastating it to the same extent. I think that would have made for some, like, powerful imagery and parallelism, which Miyazaki is usually known for. He is usually known for this kind of powerful imagery. Like, in Porco Rosso, there's a scene where Porco Rosso is recounting his friends that died in the war, and there's this amazing scene where he tries to escape from an enemy fighter pilot, and he goes up in the clouds as he sees all these planes rising through them, and he realizes that they're all going to heaven. It's like, it's just a beautiful, extremely touching scene, and I don't think that Wind Rises had stuff like that. I don't think it, in trying to get its idea across, used the kind of powerful imagery I expected from Miyazaki. And I think that's a flaw of his as a filmmaker. I think he didn't plan it out too... And I'm not saying there weren't powerful scenes in Wind Rises. Especially that last scene. That felt like it was almost part of something that was supposed to be longer and cut out and just stuck at the end. Maybe it was. I know he was getting a lot of complaints from Japanese nationalists. But, like,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of human drama that could have been touched on in that movie. And especially when you're using a touchy subject like a war arms, you know, designer, and
I still feel like the point of the movie was
like
that
if you choose a subject matter like this, you have to understand how it's going to be received, and you have to understand how to treat it delicately. You're not going to make Grave of the Fireflies into a comedy. You're not going to make a movie about
I think
Von Braun and make it, you know...
I still think that the biggest
You're not going to make Schindler's List. Like...
I think the point of The Wind Rises, though, was that it was ignoring that humanity. That this character didn't have that empathy. That he didn't have that ability to recognize what was going on in the world around him. He just cared about planes.
Then for a director who is as talented as Miyazaki, I don't think he showed it all that well. I mean, he showed that this character cares only about planes, sure. But, like, is that it? Is the character just autistic about planes and nothing else?
That's what I think it is. I think the point is that he's a fucking autistic about planes.
How's he challenged in his perception? If the point of the movie is this character is autistic about planes and he loves this, and again, like Porco Rosso, it's a very similar thing. It's about this guy's passion, but in Porco Rosso, it's challenged. You know, people are telling him he's wrong. He is running into difficulties in pursuing that challenge, and at the end of the movie, he is a changed man with a different perception. I don't see that kind of development going on in The Wind Rises.
All right, let me I need to take a step back and talk about something to do with film in general and why I think why this movie works for me. There's sort of a problem I have with sort of this script doctoring kind of thing, like what you're doing, like looking at a movie and saying, like, here's what they could have changed to make it more effective in this or that way. I think that we approach making stories too similar, saying, like, here's what makes an effective story, but as a result, there's stories we're missing out on telling, stories that don't have the same kind of satisfying and clear arcs, that just have abruptness, that have, like, you know, something like The Wind Rises, where it's one way the entire time, and then at the very end, it's like, oh shit, shouldn't have been making planes, you know? And I think that in many ways, you know, like, life can be like that a lot of the time. Life can have these moments where you don't have a gradual shift in your perception, you just suddenly feel differently because something happened, you know? Like, and I think that movie does a good job of, like, showing that this guy wouldn't have changed his mind for any other reason. Like, it took seeing, like, oh, fuck, everyone's dead. Guess I shouldn't have been making fucking planes, you know? Like, there was never a reason for him to question it until that time because he doesn't see that, totally oblivious, you know?
I don't think he actually ever confronts that, though. Like, again, there's, like, 2 lines of dialogue in the movie, and then a scene at the end.
At the very end.
But that scene was kind of bit weird and bittersweet, though, because it's kind of like you see a pile of rusted plane corpses, but then you see a couple of his planes flying through the sky, and they're giving him, like, a thumbs up, and then you see his, like, imaginary mentor. It is, like, what are you supposed to take away from that?
I think what you're supposed to take away from that is that this dude did exactly what he wanted. He lived exactly the way that he thought he had to, and the result of that is that he was complicit in mass death. And
but
he never realized
that part. I don't think that part was very clearly explained at all to the audience or to the character.
That's what they say at the end. That's what the ending is them saying like, "Hey, your planes killed a shitload of people," and him going, "Fuck, guess I shouldn't have made planes."
That's not an effective way to tell that message, though. Like, you can't just be like, Poochie dying on the way back to his planet or something. That's not.
One man's not effective filmmaking is another man's. I discovered a love for Miyazaki after watching The Wind Rises.
That's true. That's true. I will have to say, though, I think you're mistaken when you're saying, oh, you could tell different stories. No. Stories are all the same. Like, you take a script writing class, you study film for any amount of time, you realize all these stories are basically all the same.
That's why they're boring. That's why everything's fucking boring.
Well, then you're just tired of, like, repetition. Then you're watching this movie as a novelty item, which isn't.
I watch every movie as a novelty item because if it doesn't give me anything new, then I think, why the fuck did I just watch that? I mean, I just watched.
I don't necessarily disagree, but what I'm saying is, even The Wind Rises, everything is formulaic. All of this stuff is formulaic. You think the romance in Wind Rises isn't formulaic? You think that, the way this...
Oh, sure, but it's about offering me the slightest difference, Well, it's about giving me just the tiniest difference in perspective,
There's that old adage, tell the same thing but different. And at the same time, there are conventions that you generally should follow when you're trying to make an effective movie that people can relate to. I think the perspective you're coming into the movie is, this is very interesting for Miyazaki to do this. And I agree. I think it's a very interesting movie.
I didn't even think it was interesting for Miyazaki to have done it. I was just...
Or even that this movie was being made.
When I was watching the movie, it was... I will say that it was coloring my perception that this was supposed to be his last film, and that so many people were regarding it as a sort of retirement ode. Because of the fact that the movie is about, in the end, a guy retiring from this thing he's been intensely passionate about for a long time. And so when I watched this movie, thinking of it as, like, this is Miyazaki's statement, like, this is his last movie, this is him saying, like, here's what it was like, and this is how I'm going out. And so that was kind of how I took it, and that was why the 10 years stuff, for instance, resonated with me so much. The characters being like, there's only 10 years, you're really creative, and me being like, Miyazaki's been making movies for 40 fucking years, what are you talking about, But that definitely had a lot to do with why I enjoyed the movie so much.
I'm not disagreeing, and you can enjoy a movie, even if you think it's not perfect or if it has flaws. I
can't enjoy a perfect movie
really?
If it's not fun for me.
No, I'm not saying. I mean, if it's not a quote unquote fun movie or whatever, I wouldn't say it's perfect. But again, these things are all based on perception, right? All I'm pointing out is that there are ways that Miyazaki could have made his character development more effective. That he could have, gone and express these themes more clearly, and if he does a suitable job and it's good enough for you to enjoy and you find something about it to enjoy, that's fine. I'm just saying there were these parts in this movie that were inconsistent, that could have been done better, and that did not meet the intended goals of its creator.
I just don't know if changing those things would make the movie better from my perspective.
Maybe it wouldn't. I
can say there are some things that you could tell me, like, if they changed this to be like this, and like I can judge it and go, okay, that sounds cool, or I don't know, but like, I didn't come away from The Wind Rises thinking, man, there was something missing there. I came away from it just being like, fuck, that was a cool movie, like, I don't think, and there have been, like, if I want to get critical of Miyazaki, I think Kiki's Delivery Service is a movie with a lot of issues. I rewatched that recently, and my biggest issues with the movie were sort of that it has an arc, but I feel like it almost belabors its points a lot. It's sort of got this almost episodic structure to it, and we understand from pretty early on, like, what Kiki's problem is, like, what is the conflict, and then we kind of just watch that same conflict play out until it gets worse and worse and worse until she finally breaks, and then the resolution of it is really fast and not really satisfying, because right after we've got this whole speech that she's given where she's like, I'm gonna, like, oh, I need to like self-actualize and like think about who I want to be and all this kind of shit that she learns from the artist lady. It then suddenly just becomes like third act action scene and she has to save a kid and then everybody loves her. And it's like that's a movie where I do feel like, man, the way this movie was put together was obviously a collection of scenes more so than a movie. You know, like they went, we have to do this scene, then we have to do this scene, then we have to do this scene, but those scenes all are saying the same thing. So it gets repetitive and, you know, it just feels like a bunch of set pieces strung together more so than a properly written film. Probably some of that has to do with adapting a whole book into just one movie. Well, I don't know.
To be fair, that's kind of what Miyazaki does with all his movies. Most of them are adaptations. I mean, I think those are valid criticisms of Kiki's delivery service. However, I think the fact that it has a character arc at all, that it has, you know, a character realizing something about themselves, makes it superior to something like Ponyo or
I totally disagree. Totally, completely disagree. Because I don't find... Because, to me, a character arc just makes me go, oh, it's that arc that I've seen before. Like, character arcs don't impress me. Like, a character changing and growing as a person and being relatable is not interesting to me. Because that's every human being on Earth, and I hate most of them. You know, like, I don't know. Everybody has character arcs. Everybody develops. Like, why is that interesting? More so than, like, seeing crazy shit you've never seen before. Like, that's super interesting.
If you want to really get into a technical level about it, it's because when people watch a movie, they want to be able to vicariously experience things. And if you don't make your characters understandable and sympathetic, then they cease to be human, the audience becomes alienated. Of course, if you're just personally, you know, misanthropic and don't like that sort of thing, and you prefer to watch something that's a technical spectacle and beautiful and, you know,
or just alien. Sometimes I just want to see stuff that is
alien and sterile and, you know, completely elegant, but without that kind of humanizing nature. That's fine. That's part of your taste. What I'm saying is that when your movie sets out with these kinds of goals, and your movie, for example, in Ponyo, you know, you clearly try to build these themes up through the movie, and it fails at that.
I don't know if it did.
I think
don't know how much. I don't know how much of it was. Like, the thing about Ponyo, and Ponyo is supposedly an adaptation of The Little Mermaid. Obviously, it's taken hella liberties with it. I think it should have taken more. You know, like, that's if I have anything I would point out as a flaw with Ponyo, it didn't need to try to ham-fist in a character arc. And I think I don't know if Miyazaki came at it with the intentions of like, oh, we're gonna subtly hint this stuff and then pay it off at the end. I think it's more like, we got to the ending that was supposed to be there, and then he looked back and went like, oh, we didn't actually set up for this, but it's got to be there because this is The Little Mermaid, and otherwise there's no resolution to this movie, so let's just tack this on, you know?
Well, but then, either way, it makes it an inelegant movie. Or at the very least, a movie with some number of flaws that, you know, people find unenjoyable.
But I feel like the caliber of things it does right are still, like, grossly above the heads of any other anime.
I never said that. Like I said, I think all Miyazaki's movies are pretty good. You know, I wouldn't even call Ponyo a bad movie. You know, maybe I said that earlier. I don't think it's really a bad movie. But I do think the fact is, I don't think people should be looking up to Miyazaki so much and ignoring these flaws that his film works have. We can talk about whether these flaws
don't ignore his flaws. That's
good or
definitely
bad.
Fair.
But
if you're gonna,
but the fact is, the man has so many blatant either flaws in his movies or incompetencies with his writing ability, and occasionally his directorial stuff. But I'll give that a second. That I don't think you should be looking up to him this much. I don't think you should be looking up to his movies to say, I want to write character arcs like that. I just don't.
Well, certainly no, you shouldn't think that. But like I don't think he's admirable as a writer. I think he's admirable as an animator and as a.
I will not deny that. He is very admirable as an animator. And I said from the very beginning, I think he's the greatest storyboarder anime has ever seen, and I stand by that.
Yeah,
and that's something that people downplay all the time. People don't recognize, even the Sakuga people, they don't realize how important storyboarding is to a work. And sometimes storyboarding is everything.
Satoshi Kon's movies are just his storyboards.
Yeah, exactly. Watanabe rarely does any work aside from storyboarding. He's not an animator. Yeah. I'm impressed. I've seen some of the I've owned some of Shimbo's storyboards, and he draws circles. Yeah. The guy doesn't bother with like stick figures even. Just draw circles. Or you could look at something like the latest episode of Fate Apocrypha. I know you probably don't watch that anymore.
Why the fuck are you watching that?
Well,
No, I don't.
I watch everything. I watch things just to be able to hate on it. But no, the recent episode had like this fantastic animation with like a bunch of Netk animators like Baki JD and what's his face and KI and all that stuff. But like the problem was I don't think it was storyboarded very well. Half the time you couldn't see what was going on in the fights. The animation and the effects were very flashy, but you can't tell the choreography was bad, and you can't tell what's going on.
If you want to go down a rabbit hole of like shitting on Sakuga people for not appreciating that animation itself isn't always making for an impressive film, that's a rabbit hole I could go down another time.
Oh, I think that's something we both very much agree on.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I used to be one of those Sakuga people. Like I said, I bought way too much of this stuff. There was a time when I thought that all that matters is that this looks pretty, or how dare you watch an anime for the story? Don't you know it's all about animation? This is a medium of animation, and you gotta enjoy.
But I do think that the reason I've been so into Ghibli is that I think the more I understand about animation, the more impressive it is to me. Like, and the more I recognize the flaws in everything else. Like, and I mean, it helps that I've been smoking a lot of weed lately, and it's turned me into a huge elitist because, like, I can process more information when I'm high, and it makes Ghibli movies into the greatest thing ever. And any TV anime is just paltry. Like, it's funny to watch something like Made in Abyss, which is often like considered like, oh, it's Ghibli-esque. Like, it's, oh my god, it's got like almost Ghibli-level animation in places. And it's like, yeah, in places. There's maybe a couple minutes of that in the show. But like, the show on average is just a TV anime. And you watch a Ghibli movie and it's never like that. A Ghibli movie will never just be characters standing there with their mouths flapping open and shut. Like, you will not see that,
Well, I mean, there are some examples, but, generally speaking, you're right.
Yeah. And that's what
Whispers of the Heart, I remember, had quite a bit of that, but...
And, well, he didn't... That's kind of... Miyazaki didn't direct that movie.
No. So. I actually thought that was, even though Miyazaki wrote the script for that, I thought that was an amazing movie. That's probably one of my favorite Ghibli movies.
I still haven't seen Whisper of the Heart, TBH.
You should.
It's one of the few I haven't seen. But
Oh, yeah, but that's another thing. Miyazaki cannot write freaking love interest. He sucks at that. I can't remember a single love interest in any of his movies that was ever actually interesting.
Sure.
The flying boy was boring. The dragon dude from
he sucks.
The dragon dude from Spirited Away sucked.
Haku's fine.
He's just such a bland and boring character.
He's pretty boring.
No face would have been a better romantic interest.
What about Sosuke for Ponyo? He's great. Sosuke's perfect. Boring.
I mean, you liked him, but I'm not a pedophile, so.
I'm not either for boys. Anyway. So, what the fuck was I talking about?
I mean, I don't know. When I first heard May's voice, I thought she was a 13-year-old boy.
Oh, May's? Oh, fuck you. She sounds like a fucking anime girl. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway.
Anime girl, quotation marks. You were saying?
What the fuck was I? Right. The fact that his movies just are always moving, there's always something going on, and I really feel like he just maximizes, like, timing and... For instance, My Neighbor Totoro, that movie is all about, like, timing. It's all about, like, the length of shots and, like, reactions, like, characters reacting to things, or just, like, taking a long, slow tension build and then popping it into something funny. Like, the movie is just constantly doing that. And it's kind of crazy to see, like, such a consistent amount of effort put into like every shot that like at no point do things slow down and it's like normal for a little bit, you know? And I think that it's not necessarily bad to do those things, and certainly Miyazaki has made other films that do slow down a little bit here and there. Like Howl's Moving Castle has plenty of slow parts, you know. Granted, that was like when he came in late on or whatever, but like, for instance, I watched Ninja Scroll recently, and like Yoshiaki Kawajiri, amazing visual director, and the first like 20 minutes of that film are just constant visual intrigue, and then it fucking just slows way down for an exposition dump that lasts like 5 minutes, and it's like, see, this is why Kawajiri is not Miyazaki, you know, like, because Miyazaki wouldn't let there be a 10-minute exposition dump in his movie, and
see.
Yeah.
This is something I think you hit the nail on the head. Miyazaki's movies are just so terribly visually consistent. However, I would actually argue that's a downside.
I will agree that the consistency of the style is a downside.
No,
I think the consistency
not even necessarily that. I think the biggest issue here is that Miyazaki is an extreme auteur. For most of his career, he was personally redrawing keyframes and such. Yeah. He was actually going in, and when he felt something was out of his art style, he would redraw it and do it to his personal taste.
But he's changed that. He has changed that.
Not willingly. Not willingly.
Those Shinya Ohira cuts in Spirited Away. You got those weird ass cuts in Ponyo when she like transforms into this like blob thing, and it was like one animator did the whole sequence. Miyazaki was like,
"It's perfect." He didn't do that willingly. But
he said it says in the art book that he saw the sequence and thought it was so good as it is that he didn't change it.
I always assumed he was just too tired to do it anymore.
Because he's too old.
Yeah, because he's too old. But I'm sure that was
there's
too.
This is something I just learned recently. I still haven't seen The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness yet. I've been meaning to, but have you seen that? It's a documentary. No. I don't know why we recorded this when neither of us have fucking seen it, but there's this YouTube show that's a visual analysis show. You might enjoy it, called Every Frame a Painting. I don't know if you've heard
I've seen it. Didn't they quit recently? Yeah.
Yes, they just quit, and they were talking about they just happened to mention a scene from Kingdoms of Dream and Madness that they were a big fan of. And it's a part where Miyazaki is trying to draw a plane, and he keeps trying to draw it for like days and days. Hold on. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Said we got disconnected.
Clipped out for a second.
Anyway, Miyazaki's trying to draw this plane. He's drawing it for days, and he cannot get it right. And finally, he just says, well, I can't do it. Give it to somebody else. And, like, so he can do that. He is capable of delegation when he realizes he cannot do a thing, you know? And I think that I think if you watch all his movies, there's almost always at least one scene that looks nothing like a Miyazaki movie. And you go, what the hell was that?
I think when it comes to Miyazaki movies, the general attitude he has towards things is, like you were mentioning at the beginning of this podcast, this is my vision. This is how it has to be done.
Yeah. But sometimes I think sometimes his vision includes, I want that guy's weird-ass style in my movie, you know?
I think that tends to be very rare.
It's definitely more rare than it is for other anime directors.
I think that huge...
in anime, it's usually more of a melting pot.
Yeah. I think that's a big detriment against them, honestly. I think...
You could say that. I mean, I admire greatly about Hiroyuki Imaishi that he wants everyone to leave their mark as much as possible, you know? And he's like, everybody just throw your shit in there. And I think that's also really cool.
But the problem is, anime is no longer the kind of one-person project that it was, or it used to be.
Right.
Or even one person and, like, a dozen other people. Nowadays, Ghibli productions involve hundreds, if not thousands of people. Many dozens of key animators and directors. Well, I mean, when you take in, like, all the producers and auxiliary staff, yeah, probably thousands. But
No.
You sure?
There cannot be thousands of people making a fucking...
they're not all animators, but when you think about, like, marketing staff, producers, editors,
I don't even know if, like, a fucking... You have to make, like, a Marvel movie to reach 1,000, I think.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay, but the point is there's a lot of people working on it now. And... I think this kind of tyrannical attitude towards your vision tends to be detrimental because, one, Ghibli hosts so many world-class animators, you're not really giving them room to express themselves and develop as animators. Sure. And 2, it makes his style wildly predictable. And kind of like his writing, because it's all Miyazaki writing it. You were saying earlier that you think innovation is a very important factor, and I agree. Even if stories come down to the same core concepts and the same skeleton for pretty much everything, there has to be some amount of variation. You have to tell the same thing, but different. And when it's just Miyazaki's voice coming through in both the animation and the writing and the characters, it ends up feeling terribly consistent. It loses its ability to surprise you. You're watching a Miyazaki movie and thinking, gee, I wonder how this ends. Is the villain going to be redeemed and they're going to all learn a big lesson about how nice nature is?
But
like
The Wind Rises wasn't like that at all, though.
The Wind Rises was just confused, as I was saying earlier. It tries to tell this story about this guy, and
Well, look, I think we hit on the core of our debate here with the Isao Takahata thing. I think that when you brought up what you want from Miyazaki is what you kind of get from Isao Takahata, and I think that's
true. That's fair.
I think that in many ways encapsulates the argument here. I would say that my stance essentially is that while I agree that more experimentation would be better, and I really admire that Isao Takahata has done that, I feel like Miyazaki has made so many masterpiece films that no one has challenged him enough to force him to innovate, and that none of the innovations that have happened have been like so game-changing as to move the medium in a direction where Miyazaki would look worse. Like, I feel like he still holds up as, this is the guy who has done the best work in the medium, and until someone challenges that, there will be no need for him to innovate, or for us to reflect on him as someone who didn't innovate enough. Maybe he could have, maybe if he had been the one to change anime, but like, I'm sure from his perspective, it would be like, I already fucking did it once, I'm not going to do it again. Takahata obviously cares a little bit more about, innovating, advancing, giving voice to new talents, but in my opinion, I don't think he has produced something that is greater than the sum of Miyazaki's work, So,
but you keep saying these things about how Miyazaki hasn't been challenged, or he's kind of at the apex of it all. I think, again, that's just ends up being biased, because everybody has this perception that Miyazaki's so great, Miyazaki can't be beat.
It is...
Everything Miyazaki makes is a masterpiece. So you don't acknowledge the flaws that his movies have, and the fact that
I think they have plenty of flaws, but everyone has flaws.
Many other movies are superior to his because of
I can't name an anime film that I consider personally superior to Ponyo, regardless of flaws.
That's fine.
Like I think
we can all have our personal biases and our personal preferences. My favorite romantic comedy of all time is a shitty 13-minute episode series that Shaft put out back in like the early 2000s.
Wreck.
Yeah, Wreck.
Good
ass show, but like,
what do you think? What is there any anime film that you would consider flawless?
Obviously not. No.
And do you think there's any that are like, what can you name an anime film that you think is better than anything Miyazaki's made?
Yeah, sure.
Such as
off the top of my head, we were talking about Takahata earlier.
Yes.
I would say that I think Poko is better.
Really? That's the one about the testicles,
the one about,
right?
The one about the raccoons. Why did I even bring that up? Or something like Grave of the Fireflies. I thought that movie.
You really think Poko is better than any Miyazaki film?
Hey, Poko keeps appearing on Japanese, animators and film reviewers list of the most influential movies of all time. That movie is
influential.
Underrated. Yes.
Look, I haven't seen Poko, so I'm not going to make any statements about its quality. I've never heard anyone say anything good about that movie, though. But everyone I've ever known who's watched it has been like, yeah, it's just about a bunch of fucking tanukis with huge balls bouncing around. Don't watch it. And I'm like,
that's
okay.
What's so nice about it. But maybe I go against. I think I enjoy that for reasons maybe very similar to the reason you enjoy Ponyo. Let's say something like
you got a thing for huge balls.
I like big. My balls are always bouncing to the left and to the right. But yeah, 2000, was it 2001? Yeah, the Metropolis based on Tezuka's thing. I thought that was a fantastic movie too. I think
it's really, dude, it's really interesting that you just said that. You mean the Rintaro movie, right?
Yes.
That's I like that movie a lot. That movie is critically panned. You know that.
That movie, there's split critical opinions on it.
Sure.
For example, I know a lot of people in Japan panned it, but Roger Ebert also gave it like a sterling review. It's a very divisive movie, but for what it's worth, I think it's on par, if not superior, to some Miyazaki's best work. I love the way it uses colors. I think the story it tells is actually very touching and interesting, and I really like a lot of the subplots they got going on. And plus, just on a personal level, Ray Charles in the background. Come on.
I do love that movie.
But
I don't want to I can't argue against you in any way other than to say, oh, that movie's critically panned, because I haven't seen it in 10 years, but I remember loving it, and I've been meaning to
watch it when it came out. Yeah, you should rewatch it.
I've seen it twice, but both way back in the day. But I've been on a Rintaro kick, so I feel like I'm a burgeoning Rintaro apologist. So,
but even stuff, famous stuff like Akira, Ghost in the Shell 2. I don't really think any of these movies, or I forgot to mention, Beautiful Dreamer. I love that movie, but I don't think any of these movies are terribly inferior to Miyazaki's top work. I think perhaps they don't have the same kind of animation budget, but they also don't suffer from a lot of the crippling flaws that some Miyazaki's movies have, like what's it called? Very repetitive story plot lines, or characters who are unempathetic, because Miyazaki isn't really that good at writing character arcs. So I feel like while those movies might have flaws, I do not find that Miyazaki's movies are somehow an epoch, or epoch is a unit of time.
Yeah.
They're not a level above.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
The other stuff that's coming out. And I think when you idolize Miyazaki to this extent, what you're doing is you're influencing another generation of animators to say, hey, look at Miyazaki, he's done everything perfectly, like you said, you don't need to improve, nobody's caught up with Miyazaki, might as well just try to do what Miyazaki does.
I agree.
That in the end leads to terrible results.
I don't think anybody should just idolize one person. That's definitely a bad idea. You should be idolizing everyone doing good work.
You should be idolizing multiple people. Copy as many people as you can.
Simply put, yes. You should idolize more than one person.
You should copy as many people as you can.
Yeah. I mean, take the best elements of everybody doing... it's not as though Miyazaki's the only person doing amazing work. I just think he's done more of it, And I feel like I've yet to see another entity in the world of animation, put forth as much, with the exception, I don't know, but then at the same time, I also think TV anime is a whole other world, and it's got its own, because Miyazaki's made a lot of great films, but he's made one great TV show, but there's people out there
he's worked on a number of TV shows. And I don't know how much I would attribute Future Boy Conan to him, because even though he was ostensibly in the lead, there was a lot of other people working on it, and the writer was what's-his-face? It was the writer who did...
he didn't write it himself, is the point.
He didn't write it... God, I know the writer. He was the guy who did... whatever, I'll remember it later. Or I'll look it up later.
But
a very famous writer. He's a very famous writer.
I can say, as much as I can sit here and be like, oh, Miyazaki made 5 masterpieces, I can also be like, yeah, but Hideaki Anno made Eva and Karekano. That's a lot. That's a lot of hours. That's 24 hours of amazing.
And don't forget the Salaryman shit.
Yeah, Ryusei Kacho.
Yeah, Ryusei Kacho.
That's also a masterpiece.
Absolute kino. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking about TV animation, then I think someone like Dazaki is, way ahead of Miyazaki in terms of influence and...
Dazaki through, sheer force of how much fucking shit he directed. But...
Not even then. I think when it comes to Dazaki's best work, it's superior to Miyazaki movies. I can't think of a Miyazaki movie that's touched me in the same ways that Long John Silver has in, Takarajima.
I know you love some Takarajima, and I will...
That sounds kind of wrong, doesn't it?
I gotta watch it at some point. I've
it's
seen
it's an incredibly human story. It's got very well written characters, and from the very first scene where you see like a weird color shifted scene in the rain where a bunch of pirates are swashbuckling in the dark. Ugh, like the visuals are immaculate.
I've seen a spattering of Dezaki stuff, and he's a very visual director, but he's not really my aesthetic per se compared to the other Madhouse guys, But I need to watch.
I mean, he didn't just work at Madhouse. He was also
I know.
like TMS and stuff. Yeah,
I'm just saying that out of the guys who founded Madhouse were like the visual directors,
Yeah,
and like I like Rintaro and Kawajiri more than I like Dezaki, but
that's true. Well, that's not true. That's a fair opinion. Yeah. But
it is also true that I like them more. But
yeah, it is true. But again, the problem is when there's so many great directors out there, and you isolate Miyazaki with all he's only human after all, right? He's not a god. He's gonna make mistakes and he's gonna have flaws. And you praise him and you idolize him to the extent that he starts believing it himself. I think.
I wonder about that.
I wonder. Yonebashi, I mean, when you read his interviews, he's pretty self-assured.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the most interesting things that I read in that early starting point thing was that how he got into anime was he, saw Hakujaden, and basically wanted
which you hated for some reason, right?
Yo, I hated that movie. I thought it was fucking garbage.
Why do you hate that movie so much?
It's real bad. But he the funny thing about it is that he saw the movie, he was obsessed with it as a teenager, and then he got into the industry hoping to make something as good. But then he said after about 10 years of distance from when it came out, he thought it was shit and thought he could do better. That was his motivation.
That sounds like Miyazaki.
His motivation was like, I wonder if I could make like a way better version of that, and I think he did. But
as I was saying,
that's also though why I think I feel like if he had felt challenged by someone else, he would have tried to break away a little bit more. Like if he saw someone doing something, and maybe this is just him being short-sighted or closed-minded. Like maybe people have made things that he should have looked at and thought, "Wow,
I
that's
very much agree with
better
that
than what I did."
I mean, I'm not saying he should jump on the Netcade train or anything, but during the late 90s and early 2000s, there was certainly a lot of experimental stuff going on with anime. Yeah. I know you like Anno and stuff, and directors
and Miyazaki loves Anno too, but I don't know if he looked at it and went, "Oh, this is better than my shit," He probably just looked at it and went, "Oh, this is the second best guy."
I don't think he likes him that much. I know Miyazaki has a lot of respect for Takahata and a lot of other directors, but I don't think Miyazaki's the kind of guy who looks at it. I'm pretty sure he's made comments about Evangelion before. I remember reading them where he said he didn't like it that much. Or was that Tomino? I can't remember.
That sounds like more of a Tomino thing. Miyazaki and Anno are like pals. They're hang out.
They used to work together, but I know that in some cases Miyazaki doesn't really approve of Anno's work. And I mean, Anno doesn't approve of Anno's work, so I guess they could be buddies about that. But yeah, like I was saying, because people respect Miyazaki so much, it ends up being a very stifling work experience.
Oh yeah,
when Yonebayashi and Nishimura left to make Studio Ponok, I mean, this was after Miyazaki had already left, but ostensibly, he's coming back again and doing all this shit. But they said that they weren't satisfied working at Ghibli because of the fact that when they worked under Takahata and Miyazaki, it was very oppressive. These people that will go in and redraw your keyframes.
That's what the documentary is about. That's what Kingdom of Dreams and Madness is about. Is that showing you how
neither of us watched it, so
I've heard the details about it, and it's basically about how working at Ghibli fucking blows and everyone hates it.
Yeah,
I mean that's actually what Spirited Away is about too. He said that
Spirited Away was about prostitutes, man.
No, okay. First of all,
Spirited Away was about prostitutes and credit cards.
I don't know if you actually believe that or if you're memeing, but that's not true. And I did a lot of research.
Whenever you especially in a very Japanese, I don't think it's actually about prostitutes, but I think it's supposed to evoke that sort of imagery. Well, a young girl working at a bathhouse, it's supposed to evoke imagery of some
there's
sort of
definitely
exploitation.
A little bit of that imagery is supposed to be in there for sure, but people read it like it's about prostitution and it's not. It's about and Miyazaki is like explicitly said that like his biggest influence for it was like young people who come to work at Ghibli is like what Chihiro's supposed to be. And like he like saw it as himself as Yubaba, and like he is just this oppressive slave driver, but like if you are diligent, you might find reward in working there, you know? And like that's like explicitly what the movie's about.
I think that's just a microcosm of it. I think the movie is also about like, you know, Japanese economics and stuff, but
sure.
That's probably like a different discussion we could be having.
You have to watch my Spirited Away video before we have that discussion. I made a
You keep making all these videos and you expect
this
everybody
was years
to watch
ago.
them.
I made a 30-minute analysis of it. Like
they're all like an hour's long, and nobody has the time for that, man.
People are gonna have the time to sit through this 2-hour podcast, apparently.
Oh shit! This is like 2 hours. Yeah, it's like an hour 40 minutes.
140. You want to wrap it up?
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Got any closing statements?
Well, I feel like I already made my closing statements, so no. I tried to wrap it up like 20 minutes ago. We went on another tangent.
My bad then. We went on another tangent, I guess.
It's fine. Do you have anything you want to plug here while we're here? Since this is going to be probably seen by a minimum of 10,000 people.
Oh, you're too greedy. You're too greedy. This is going to be seen by a minimum of 2,000 people. Look at
10,000.
10,000. Oh, wait. 10,000? Okay. Yeah, this is going to be seen by a minimum of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
You think it'll get that many viewers?
Absolutely. I'm posting this on After Dark, which averages that much, and this is an anime-relevant topic, so it could have up to 40,000, depending on who watches it. So, do you have anything you want to plug? To 40,000.
Maybe I'll make a video
soon.
I did want to make a video response to your thing on Shinkai, so I could plug that. Put my Twitter in.
Are you gonna make your own channel, or are you gonna keep using Nino's channel?
I'm not gonna keep using Jimmy's channel. Jimmy's channel is dead as like all hell. But I'll probably make my own channel.
So if we're expecting a response video or anything from you, where should we? I guess just follow your Twitter. Everything will get posted there.
Just follow
right?
my Twitter. I'll just probably use my current account for my channel.
What's
if you
the
want to stick that in the description. I don't care.
What's the @ for your Twitter?
It's like outsall OUT_SALL. For the love of me, I can't remember why I picked that name.
Okay, so @out_Saul. Follow E-kon on Twitter if you're curious to see. First of all, if you want to watch him fight everyone in Anti-Twitter. If you want to watch him argue with every fucking person in the Anti-Twitter sphere, oftentimes without realizing who they are, like arguing with Miles from Crunchyroll for like hours without realizing that he's Miles from Crunchyroll. Or
sorry, Anti-Twitter guys, like, you're not that relevant. I don't know you.
Or screaming at Kevin from Sakugaboru all the time. Or just arguing with anybody. Go follow E-kon on Twitter and look forward to when he possibly puts out some response videos. Hey, we actually got this fucking podcast done, so I believe in some things. You know?
Yeah, we were gonna do this for like ages, and it just kept getting delayed.
Yeah,
like you had time, I didn't have time, and I had time,
and hey, we'll probably do another one if we have another argument that we both feel passionately about enough to.
Oh come on,
we
will. Yeah, we can have one like once a month or something.
Yeah. All right, that's it, everybody. See you later.